Okay, let's continue with the study. Welcome to The Big Puzzle. In this podcast, we explore the subtle connections between science, religion, politics, economics, and history. One piece at a time, we unveil the big picture of this shared experience that we call life. So, in our last episode about the story of Zeniff, we were analyzing this part of the history, right? So when the Nephi had been attacked by the Lamanites, and so they sent an army or spies or a combination of both, depending on who's telling the story. And we have Zeniff there as part of that group. And, Zeniff decides that the mission that they were assigned was not correct. He creates a problem, and, Nephites kill each other in the wilderness. And Zeniff and a few survivors come back to the land of Zarahemla. And all of this happened under the kingdom of King Benjamin, the son of King Mosiah, who was a prophet that was instructed by the Lord to lead the main group of the Nephites, and they joined the Amalekites and so on. Well, if you haven't seen that one, I invite you to go and watch it, so you have the context now. But let's see what happened afterwards. So when we have to jump all the way to here, right? In the middle of Mosiah's, the son of Benjamin's, the grandson of the other Mosiah kingdom. And now we have Ammon, and we will be covering that in the next one. But basically, it's when they finally reconnect. And the king at that time was Limhi, that was the grandson of Zeniff. So we are reading first about this encounter, and then in the middle of this, we go to the record. That's just 2 chapters, the record written by Zeniff himself. So, but why do I explain this? Because when Limhi is explained to Ammon what had happened since they left the land of Zarahemla, he says, actually he's talking to his own people. They're doing kind of a recount of the story, similar to what Moses did in Deuteronomy, right? So he's recalling the whole history to his people. And ye are all witnesses this day that Zeniff, who was made king over these people, he being overzealous to inherit the land of his father, therefore being deceived by the cunning and craftiness of King Laman, who having entered into a treaty with King Zeniff, and having yielded up into his hand the possession of part of the land, or even the city of Lehi-Nephi and the city of Shimlon, and the land round about. And he keeps explaining. But what I want to focus is the description that Limhi gives of Zeniff is him being overzealous. And later we'll see that comes directly from Zeniff's mouth. So he said that he was overzealous. And some people could take this as, it's good to be zealous, but it's not good to be overzealous. I don't think that is correct way to interpret this, because it's not been about being zealous about following the Lord or obeying the commandments or anything like that. It was overzealous about something that was really not important, was not part of the plan, was not revealed by a prophet, was an obsession. So overzealous is about this obsession. He got obsessed that he wanted to inherit the land. And we discussed about where that might have come from, in the previous episode. But overzealous to inherit the land of his fathers, right? So now let's jump a couple of chapters after this, when we have the account of Zeniff. And we already talked about, the first part when he talks about that he wanted to make a treaty and all that part. But now in verse 3, it says, and yet I've been overzealous to inherit the land of our fathers, collected as many as were desirous to go up to possess the land, and started again on our journey into the wilderness to go up to the land. So he goes back and he started convincing other people that they should go and inherit the land. And there's many people who follow them. So they decided, again, there were people with his same mentality, and that will be part of the problem. Remember that in the introduction, in the first video, we talk about this effect that, when people feel rejected because of this, they can't figure out this difference between being unique and being accepted and all of that. Well, these are a group of people with the same mentality, and that will become part of the problem. Because they were not forced to go there. They willingly followed Zeniff because they had the same mindset as Zeniff. So they decided to leave. And I think that these are the dissenters that, we saw before, that they said that King Benjamin had to deal with dissenters and people who joined the Lamanites. So they didn't know what happened. So they just knew that they left, and they assumed that they joined the Lamanites. And in a certain way, they did. Not in the basis that they wanted to. But what happened? What happened during this trip? Right? And this, again, gives us a good clue that this was not a righteous thing to do. It was not the proper thing to do. And they should have realized that. Because it says immediately after, but we were smitten with famine and with sore afflictions, for we were slow to remember the Lord our God. And, this is Zeniff 3 decades after, right? Well, I don't know if you hear that noise, sorry. But it's 3 decades after, so he's reflecting on a lot of things. So we see a kind of different Zeniff. Was it a conversion? Maybe partially. There's certain things that I still think he could have done better to really make up for his mistakes that he didn't. So that's why I think that sometimes we give him, a recognition, or we give him a fame that he doesn't deserve. Sorry, Zeniff, if when I die, I go meet you, and if I'm wrong, I will apologize, but this is what I'm reading here, right? And each of you can agree or disagree. But again, they were wandering the wilderness, but eventually they find a place where that internal battle happened, and then Zeniff goes and talks to the king of the Lamanites, who is this Laman, right? His name was Laman, and he comes to an agreement, a treaty. But it's interesting because the king says, yeah, they could go. Say, and I went in unto the king, and he covenanted with me that I might possess the land of Lehi Nephi and the land of Shilom. And the king does something interesting. He asks his people, or he forces his people to leave those lands. But, and sometimes I say, well, that's a good thing to do. I mean, it was a good sign that the king made his people move out. But what they left was not something that, very worthy. Because in verse 8 it says, and we began to build buildings and to repair the walls of the city. So they had to, fix what the previous tenants had not taken care of. So yeah, it was not kind of a chosen city or a set up city. It was kind of some ruins. Okay, you guys live here. But there were some ulterior motives for King Laman. And in verse 10, Zeniff finally says, now it was the cunning and craftiness. And remember, we just mentioned these words. So Limhi was saying exactly these same words when he was describing. So basically, this third generation were still just, relying on what Zeniff said. It was the cunning and the craftiness of King Laman to bring my people into bondage, that he yielded up the land that we might possess it. Okay, so wasn't it that there was so much good in the Lamanites? He didn't want them to be destroyed, and he preferred to kill his own brothers than to, defend or attack or spy or whatever on the Lamanites. But it gets worse. So compare that initial idealized version that he had. Again, it was a misplaced pride. Pride is always misplaced, but a pride that misplaced empathy. In verse 12 says, now they were a lazy and idolatrous people. Therefore they were desirous to bring us into bondage, that they might glut themselves with the labors of our hands, that they might feast themselves upon the flocks of our fields. And so, apparently they were not as good as he said they were. And the Lamanites, King Laman becomes, worried that these new people will become too strong, so he couldn't dominate them. So he decides to start attacking them. And in verse 13, we find that, he started to stir up his people and start to have wars and contentions in the land. And let's see. So this is another interesting thing. In the previous chapter, we were discussing about, can you go and attack your enemies? In general, the Lord requires his people to defend themselves, right? So defensive wars are almost always, I would say always, are permitted. But offensive wars, there's a few times, right, where they were. And now it says in 16 that he armed his people with bows, arrows, swords, scimitars, clubs, slings, all manner of weapons, and they went forth against the Lamanites to battle. So again, the same thing that he objected, that why are we going to go and attack the Lamanites? And remember that they were going because the Lamanites had attacked them before, had found them in the land of Zarahemla and attacked them, and they, was an offensive, but with defensive purposes, so that the Nephites were not trying to go and take the land or to destroy the Lamanites. So it was an offensive with defensive purposes, as much as we can understand. So now Zeniff is doing the exact same thing. He's going and attacking the Lamanites because they went forth. It's not like that we prepare to defend or prepare. So they went forth. And but here's something interesting that he talks for the first time, that they cry mightily to the Lord that he would deliver us out from the hands of our enemies. For we were awakened to a remembrance of the deliverance of our fathers. So it's the first time that we see a sign of repentance, a sign of understanding that, we can't do this. We need the help of the Lord. And said, and God did hear our cries and did answer our praise. And they went to battle, and, they won, but at a cost. So it says that 279 of their own people. So 3,043 Lamanites died, but 279 of the people of Zeniff died as well. So, yeah, they were given the opportunity to survive. Now, after this, kind of, King Layman gives up. He was probably old, and they were able to live in peace for about 20 years. But then, in the next chapter, chapter 10, verse 6, we know that King Layman died, and now his son, this only refers to the son of King Layman, decided to, okay, we need to go again. So they start preparing again for war. And in verse 7, but I had sent my spies out round about the land of Shemlom, that I might discover their preparations. So, again, how ironic. When he was sent as a spy, he ruined the whole thing. But now he was the one sending the spies. What was going through his mind, we don't know. But the irony is quite clear. So eventually, they get attacked and they fight again. And he said that he was being old. He being old, he still, fought. And it says, and it came to pass that we did go up in the strength of the Lord to battle. And now he said, now the Lamanites knew nothing concerning the Lord, nor the strength of the Lord. Therefore, they depended upon their own strength. Yeah, they were a strong people as to the strength of men. Okay, I already said this like 5 times, but we need to keep it saying it. Was it too hard to see how the Lamanites were? Now, in the verse 12, he said, they were a wild and ferocious and bloodthirsty people, believing in the tradition of their fathers. And then he tells the story. And remember, it says that he taught this to his own people. So that's another sign of repentance. And also it's a sign that his people were not really converted. And we will see in the next episode that, that was not a full conversion. It was not a kind of an Alma and his people conversion of the people under King Benjamin. There was not that full conversion. There was just partial conversion for convenience during wartime. Right? So he tells all the reasons why, the Lamanites hated them, and tells a story about Nephi and, and how the Lord, how the Lemuel and family, they got wroth with him until the Nephi had to leave. So basically referring to this early part of the story. And finishes saying, for this very cause has King Layman, by his cunning and his lying craftiness and his fair promises, deceived me, that I have brought these my people up into this land, that they may destroy them. Yeah, and we have suffered these many years in the land. And now I, Zeniff, after having told all these things unto my people concerning the Lamanites, I did stimulate them to go to battle with their might, putting their trust in the Lord. Therefore we did contend with them face to face. And we did drive them again out of the land, and we slew them with a great slaughter, even so many that did not number them. And then, they began to tend their flocks until the ground, and so on. So we see this effort of King Zeniff to help his people to understand their mistake, to understand that the first mistake there was, oh, there's so much good. The Lamanites are so much better than the Nephites. We'd rather, kill our brothers, kill our, our own people. And we see these attitudes today. In the what I hope to be the last chapter in this, scriptures usually shows us a contrast. So we will see how immediately after this full story, we have a very interesting contrast about some other people that went to the Lamanites. I will leave it at that, but you probably know what I'm talking about if you know the story. But this is why I don't think that Zeniff was really that much changed. Because in the last verse says, and now I, being old, did confer the kingdom upon one of my sons. Therefore I say no more. May the Lord bless my people. For me, it's a big whatever. I don't care. I just gave my kingdom to one of my sons. He doesn't even talk about his sons. We know who his son was King Noah. We're going to be talking about him in the next chapter. But the people accepted King Noah. So people were not changed. King Noah was probably even worse than Zeniff. And this thing about one of my sons. So we have the other story, again, a contrast. We have King Mosiah, right? The second King Mosiah, the son of Benjamin. And he didn't just choose one of his sons to be, the new king, but he decided or was inspired to change the system, to change the monarchy to something that we could say is a variation of a democracy, right? So we're with people that were chosen, or with leaders that were chosen from the people that could be removed, and so on. So Zeniff could have done the same thing. Another thing that Zeniff could have done is say, okay, guys, this was a huge mistake. Let's go back to the land of Zarahemla. Let's figure out how to leave this place. Sorry, I don't want to be your king. This was a terrible plan. But no, he never gave up in his ultimate plan. We know that Limhi did some efforts to contact that were, a temporary failure, even though they were very helpful or very useful afterwards. But we will be talking about this part of the story here. But again, those are for me are signs that says that, yes, Zeniff did understand his mistake. He partially corrected it, but I still live with the feeling that he didn't do his best effort. He could have found somebody better than Noah, because we don't see in Noah a transformation from being, somebody who, was on the fence and then decides to get, full evil. He started just, being full evil. So it's probably that Zeniff at that point he didn't care. I tried, yeah. I made my mistakes. At least that's the way I write the story. And we know from what we were reading before, and there's a lot more examples that, to the point of Limhi, who was the first righteous king in this part, the one who really tried to figure things out, which eventually led him to stop being the king, right? Because when you can see in the graph, when they finally leave, it's never mentioned Limhi being their king anymore or having any other relevance. So he took it as his role, as his final act to finally fixed the problem. Finally started with his grandfather Zeniff and aggravated by his father Noah. Okay, I think this will. I thought this would be shorter. There's a lot of other things, so I want to invite you again to go read yourself more about this. If you find any other signs, if you disagree with me, please tell me why. Make your case about why am I wrong. There's a lot to learn about human nature. There's a lot to learn about our time. There's plenty of people. We could say that, I would say that many people who leave the church in particular, they have Zeniff spirit, right? They decide to fight, to look at everything bad with the people who remain in the church. They can find all the faults and they can pinpoint all the mistakes that there are. I mean, the Nephites were not perfect. The members of the church, we are not perfect. We're trying to become better, but there's plenty of room for improvement. But it's not fair to compare the worst of someone with the best of somebody else. And they try to see in the world, in the opposition. And when I say the world, I'm not talking about people who, no, normal people. I'm talking about people who are opposing to the principles, to the doctrine, to the revelation, to God. And there's plenty of those. So they decide to see all the good there, right? They can't see anything bad with them, but they can see, what is the mote in their neighbor's eyes. I think that's a word in English. So big lesson for us today, and see if we personally are not falling into that trap. Let's try to be objective. There's faults everywhere. There's good and bad in everyone. This is not about saying who is better. It's about following the Lord and following the prophets, the apostles, the leaders, his church, the Church of Jesus Christ. Okay, I'll leave it here. I hope that you hopefully learned something, or at least thought about something that you never thought before. Please leave comments. I'll be interested to know if what you think about this. Share this with someone that you think could benefit from this. And well, see you in the next one. Bye.